Hi, my name's Gayle Pringle and I'll report on a recent project exploring student choices of study mode in hybrid flexible learning. I'll start with some brief context. I wanted to explore student choices in an environment where, as Bill Wiggers et al. Suggest, blended learning is the new normal, but which brings both opportunities and challenges. Lomer and Palmer note that digital literacies is a key issue here, the practices that allow students and teaching staff to make the most of the online learning opportunities available. Students' preferences for in-person learning have been widely reported in recent research. However, there are also examples of students continuing to choose to study online, very often because of the greater flexibility this mode is perceived to offer. So how do we harness the benefits and overcome the challenges? One possibility is hybrid flexible or high flex learning, as outlined by Brian Beatty. The hybrid part of this is that learning activities are offered in different study modes. These include both in-person and online options, and the opportunity to study synchronously or asynchronously. The flexible part is that students have complete and ongoing freedom to choose between these study modes and can mix and match as they choose. All of these study modes lead to the same learning outcomes. Benefits include increased access opportunities and flexibility for students, but there are challenges, not least around time, as both students and teaching staff manage these multiple modes. So I decided to hybrid flexibilize my own Developing Your Academic Writing, or DYAW, provision. This focuses on subject-specific academic writing development for top postgraduate students in social sciences. It's co-curricular, it supports the curriculum, but it's not credit-bearing. It's optional and held on a drop-in basis where students can choose which sessions they'd like to attend. It's large-scale provision with hundreds of students participating, and this, along with the existing flexibility, made it seem like a good fit for the hybrid flexible approach. So this year, I offered the choice of 3 study modes: in-person classes on campus, online classes via Zoom, or asynchronous independent study activities, which we called anytime activities and which were available via Moodle. In keeping with the hybrid flexible approach, all of these activities were based on the same learning outcomes. Students had complete flexibility to pick and choose between them and could choose different options for different sessions. I decided early on to use identical materials for both the in-person and online synchronous classes, but there were some differences in delivery. In in-person classes, students worked on short incremental discussion activities in small groups. I'd found these short activities were less effective in online breakout rooms, so in the online class, I asked students to complete the exercises individually and then share their ideas using the chat function or audio. The asynchronous option used similar structure and exercises to the synchronous classes. I used the H5P format on Moodle. This is one example where students read a short text extract, reflect on its strengths and weaknesses, and complete a few true-false questions. They then consider how to improve the example and finally watch a short video which discusses this further. Although the delivery method is different, this reflects similar activities designed to scaffold students' understanding and writing practices in the live classes. I evaluated this high-flex provision through an online questionnaire at the end of the semester. 93 students completed the questionnaire. I asked these students which of the study modes they participated in. They could choose as many of the 3 options as applied. 3 things jump out from this slightly messy Venn diagram. Firstly, all 3 study modes were used. Secondly, most students took part in more than one study mode. Almost 2/3 chose 2 or all 3 of the available options over the semester. Thirdly, there are obvious differences in the numbers involved. The online live class was selected most commonly. The asynchronous anytime option was selected by 40 respondents, but was almost never used as the sole study mode. Students could then select as many reasons as they wanted to indicate why they'd chosen a particular mode. This chart shows the percentage of participants in each study mode who selected it because they preferred this mode. So more than 70% of participants who joined in-person classes did so because it was their preferred study mode. This reflects what much of the literature suggests about a general preference for in-person learning. Although numbers taking online classes were higher overall, the proportion of those students who did so because they specifically preferred online classes was much lower, at just under 25%. For example, one comment highlights that although they sometimes took part in online classes, they still preferred the in-person version. But it's worth noting that the preferences for in-person aren't universal. Some of the students actively preferred the other options, and that students didn't always suggest the mode they stated a preference for. That all the study modes were utilised suggests that, along with the second comment here, many students enjoyed having the option to attend in different ways. But why did students prefer the modes that they did? One clue is in another possible reason for selecting the mode: opportunities to interact with other students or with the teacher. More than 50% of students choosing in-person classes cited these opportunities as reasons, while a far smaller proportion did for the online synchronous option. Interestingly, this interaction was rarely discussed further in open comments on in-person learning, but it was highlighted in comments on online classes. One student noted that they were able to interact and participate in online classes too, so they weren't missing out. But the second comment here is interesting, that Zoom classes are a good alternative for students who prefer not to work in groups with students they don't know well. In-person was more commonly associated with interaction, but that wasn't always what students wanted. So again, we have diverse preferences. Another key reason for students' choices was suitable scheduling, and this is where online classes suddenly leap ahead. This might have been because these classes were a literal best fit with students' timetables, but participants' comments suggest that this is often about a more general sense that online classes save time. As one participant states, they're easier to fit into their day and are far more convenient. Asynchronous activities could be a backup. As one student says, they could be used if they were too busy to attend a live class. This suggests that there's a difference between students' ideal preference, often for in-person learning, and their more practical preference for what works in reality. Perhaps the biggest surprise was that the asynchronous anytime activities were used for revision, as this comment suggests, to review what had been learned in class or to go over anything that had been missed. I'm glad the option for revision was there, but it does suggest that I haven't yet been able to support students to really get the benefits of asynchronous learning for independent study. So overall, it worked. I'm happy that each study mode was used, and the results suggest the provision did meet different student needs and was more easily accommodated alongside other commitments. These findings were consistent with the literature, in that in-person learning was often seen as better, while online learning was more convenient. However, student preferences were diverse, and it came through very clearly that preferences and priorities are different things. Students often choose a study mode based on practical considerations rather than on what they think is best. I enjoyed thinking about how best to design and deliver the different elements, but the proponents of HyFlex learning weren't wrong when they mentioned time as a factor. It just is more time consuming to prepare 3 different versions of each session. So if you're considering adopting a HyFlex approach, I'd recommend thinking carefully about the specific benefits this approach will bring for your cohort. For me, those benefits absolutely justified the time involved, and I will use the same approach in future. In terms of implications and future work, this study suggests that we still have work to do to support students with the online part of blended learning, so that it becomes not just the more convenient option, but one which is perceived as something similar value to in-person activities. This might involve clearer communication about what's involved in online learning, including on opportunities for interaction. It was clear that greater scaffolding was needed to help students use asynchronous resources for independent learning, not just revision. There are several options here. It might be that the specific activities I designed worked better for revision, and that there are changes I could make to make them more appealing as standalone resources. But I suspect that this format is generally less familiar, and more scaffolding to support students with how to and why use asynchronous activities would be helpful. Finally, there are opportunities here to maximise the benefits of both online and in-person learning. I standardised my materials as much as I could when I first tried this approach, but in future I'd like to explore where slightly different approaches might work to play to the strengths of each mode. This seems like a perfect opportunity to collaborate with students in order to explore further what these approaches could be. Thank you.